by the Social Sciences Unit of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences in the faculty. It is my hope that this would serve not just as a general source of information, but as a motivation to reflect on our work context and how we can assist each other in dealing with the challenges of loneliness and isolation, and how we encourage good mental health. I therefore trust that we would gain much from our experts who have gathered here today to share with us, and that we would be able to apply that knowledge both individually and collectively. And so to our speakers, I say from now, thank you for agreeing to partner with us here in the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies for this event. Thanks to you. And thank you to our audience for attending. And I'd also like to commend the team for their efforts in staging this event. And as I welcome you, I wish for you every success. Thank you. Not hearing you.
Thank you for that welcome, Professor Barrett. So we are getting into the heart of things. As you know, we're here today to discuss the topic of mental health and to learn more from our guest speaker and our panelists about the issue and how it affects various social groups. But before that, our communication arts and technology interns have a special item to help ease us into the proceedings. Let's watch.
Diary. My name is Romani, and I suffer from social anxiety. So there are different types of anxiety. Andea, she has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That means she's extremely obsessed with being organized, even patterns, and dislikes untidy spaces, which leads her to hating when somebody touches her things. Yola is somewhat different from Dea and I. She suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and kind of has an anger issue. But you'd never know because she controls it so well.
You need help. I think you could meet a lot of new friends today. Look around and see if there's anybody you'd like to talk to. Oh my God.
What's on your mind?
Do you want to leave? Nah, I think we should have a couple more drinks and cheers to life. By the way, guys, I think I'm going to see a therapist. Yeah.
This video is a snapshot from a media project by Alia Thomas, one of our graduates from 2021. So that was good preparation for what we're here to talk about. And to help us do that today is our guest speaker, Miss Novia Condell, health specialist at UNICEF Jamaica. Just a brief introduction to Miss Condell. She is the health specialist at UNICEF Jamaica, where she is responsible for overseeing the Survive and Thrive program of the UN agency, whose interventions include the COVID-19 response, digitizing the vaccination system, and upgrading cold chain capacity, nutrition, and mental health. Jamaica is part of a global UNICEF project to prioritize mental health and has supported local interventions. These include the establishment of the You Matter Mental Health chatline with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. A former employee of the ministry, Ms. Condell has been with UNICEF since 2006.
Thank you so much, Damoy. Really appreciate that introduction. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Dean Charmaine Barrett and the rest of the University of Technology team for really prioritizing this issue and facilitating this forum today. I am going to share a brief presentation. I don't know if someone can make it so that I'm able to share, and let me know when. But as Damoy said, this issue of mental health, especially as it regards and impacts on Jamaica's children, adolescents, and young people, is a key priority of UNICEF's program. We have been working in this area for some time. We have been doing quite a bit of work with the Ministry of Health, and we continue to work with the ministry along with a number of other stakeholders in this regard. So let me just share some key information with you as we expand on the discussion today. Just for your information, I will be using some terms. I just want you to be clear on what I mean when I talk about adolescent. And adolescent, by WHO definition, is a person between the ages of 10 and 19 years. Young people are defined as people between the ages of 10 and 24 years. And the WHO definition of youth is a person between 15 and 24 years. However, just to also let you know, CARICOM has a definition of youth that is sometimes used here in Jamaica as well, and that is a person between 15 and 30 years. But as far as my presentation is concerned, bear in mind the WHO definition. So I'm talking about people in the age of adolescence up through that youth definition of up to 24 years. We all know about the transition from child to adult. It is an exciting time of life. There is rapid physical, cognitive, social, and emotional and sexual development. There's a widening gap between biological maturity and the social transition to adulthood. So while the body is changing, the child is still a child because the process is not just biological, it's also a social transition. And then the caregivers and the people who deliver services, education services, health services, and so on to this person has to have kind of reach a delicate balance between their protection and their autonomy, because our adolescents are coming into their own in terms of their ability or their evolving ability to make decisions. We're also learning quite a bit about brain development during this time of life. And it's very active during adolescence and prior to, I don't know, maybe certainly 10 years ago, science didn't have as great a picture as it does now when it comes to brain development during the adolescent years. In fact, it's finding out that this brain development continues into the early 20s. There's a lot of synaptic pruning, which means that if you're not using certain parts of your brain, they begin to shut down. So, you know, it gets a little bit older to teach the old dog new tricks. So critical that we take advantage of this time of childhood into adolescence to teach young people or to engage young people on learning healthy behaviors. There's a delay in the maturation of the prefrontal cortex, and this is the region of the brain that controls planning, working memory, organization, and mood management. So as the prefrontal cortex matures, adolescents can better reason, they can develop a bit more control over their impulses and make better judgments. So this is an evolving capacity, and it's critical that we engage here when it comes to our adolescents and youth and teaching them or supporting their adaptation of healthy behavior. Importantly, the reward relevant regions of the brain are very active, right? So adolescents will respond differently to rewards. A lot of people wonder how it is that an adolescent will take so many risks. That is because the risk-taking part of your brain is very active, and often the perceived rewards for taking risks far outweigh the consequences of taking the risk. And so sometimes it's very difficult for a parent, a teacher, to understand, why would this person do this? Well, this is why. It's because that part of their brain is much more active than the part that is going to weigh consequences. And rational decision making can be reduced, obviously, especially during emotionally charged situations. So what's the implication for our work with adolescents and youth? Well, how young people, we have to think about how young people are going to understand and act on information. Very often we hear a lot of folks who deliver services, folks in charge of who have responsibility over an adolescent or a young person say, well, I'm gonna tell you this thing so many times and you don't get it, right? So there may be some things happening on a biological level that you'll have to repeat. You'll have to say it several times, right? Before they kind of embrace it and act on it. By whom and how are they influenced? And this is critical, especially for those of us who are in the media, who are in health education work. We have to think about these things. How and by whom are young people influenced if we want to impact on their ability to take in information and act on it. We also have to think about, it also has implications for how they think about the future and how they make decisions in the present that will affect their future. So a critical piece of this is, if we're looking at mental health support, if you want that young person to adapt a situation or a behavior where they are going to prioritize self-care, where they're going to prioritize their mental health and well-being, the decisions that they make for now will continue to affect them for many years forward. Not just mental health, but in all aspects of their lives. And it's also important to know that adolescents and young people will make mistakes just like everybody else. I mean, we've all been there. But how they sort of bounce back and are resilient to some of the impacts is also critical and important. How they perceive risk. This is obviously a time of experimentation. Can we have a situation where our adolescents and young people are able to experiment in a healthy way? And then how are adolescents seen and heard? How are they received? How serious are they? Are people taking them when they speak out? These are important things for us to consider. Implications, again, behaviors that begin in this time of life will impact on the morbidity and mortality across the life course. So we see a situation, for example, where somebody may bottle up their feelings, they may not be so expressive, they may not find that safe space to discuss what is happening to them. And if this is reinforced within the adolescent period, then this may actually become an issue that can have a greater life consequence further down the road. Adolescents and young people, as we know, are uniquely susceptible to social and environmental influences. And so we have to look at our environments, the communities, the family structure, the schools within which our adolescents and young people are developing, and making sure that those environments are facilitating the behaviors that we want to see later on. Adolescence is a stressful time. It's a time of many firsts. The first romantic feelings, the first menstrual period, peer pressure encounters, and really a time for making big decisions about the future. And these are high stress moments in a child's life, and they can bring on many emotions in a time of really rapid developmental change. Often, this is what we see. There is a strong generational gap between the people who deliver services among our young people and the people the young people themselves, right? And I hear it a lot. We work with a variety of service delivery folks across health, education, child protection. And I hear it a lot. Oh, these children aren't resilient. These children, Lord, man, every little thing, you know? But the truth is, we didn't grow up in the environment that these young people are growing up in. This is probably the most stressful time in terms of the need to achieve in a particular way, in terms of your prospects for the future, and looking at all of the external stressors, looking at the fact that family structures have changed, looking at many of the issues and the environment, the structural issues that are affecting how adolescents are able to cope. However, through it all, adolescents and young people are very often misunderstood within their families, at school, by the people within health and education and otherwise, and policymakers certainly, who are there to ensure their achievement of the highest standards of health. Worse yet, in many sectors, they're often viewed as problems or threats. Last year, UNICEF released its State of the World's Children report. We release one every 2 years globally. And last year, the State of the World's Children report really reflected, its focus was on mental health because globally we're having a mental health emergency. And there are some key facts that I want to point out to us. There are 1.2 billion adolescents worldwide. This is the largest group of adolescents that have ever existed since we've started counting people, right? About 90% of adolescents live in low and middle income countries, often with a lot of issues around equal treatment, equal access to opportunities, and 125 million live in areas affected by armed conflict, and Jamaica is one of those areas. So you see already there's a tremendous amount of stress that comes with living in that kind of environment. 1 in 4 of the poorest adolescents has never attended school, and more than 200 million adolescents of secondary school age are not in school at all. And this has been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of children were simply unable to access because of that digital divide, and just simply have not gone back to school. The State of the World's Children report also showed that nearly 1 in 7 children and adolescents in the Latin American and Caribbean region have a mental disorder. Nearly 1 in 7 in our region. Among adolescents aged 10 to 19, an estimated 15% live with a diagnosed mental disorder as defined by the WHO. And in Jamaica, that figure is at 16.5%, the estimation, which is above the global average. Capri also did a study in 2021. It's called Mind the Gap. It's very interesting. And according to the Capri study, 45% of all adolescents in Jamaica had consistently experienced anxiety symptoms. 60% of children in state care exhibit psychosocial problems, and this is not strange. Many of the children in state care are there because they've been through a lot of trauma. And 76% exhibit maladjusted behaviors, including social withdrawal, aggression, and suicidal tendencies. And our colleagues at the Ministry of Education have been lamenting the return to school, all the aggression that a lot of children are displaying. Some of them are displaying withdrawing some kind of social anxiety symptoms. So our children have to get back to being social, and there needs to be really a program, some kind of support for the children who are struggling as our system gets back to normal. What else do we know? So we also know from a 2014 study that was done by the Ministry of Health, the UA, and UNICEF, that 60% of all attempted suicides treated at hospital fall in the 10 to 24-year age group. So attempted suicides, 60% are young people. In 2017, this Global School Health Survey showed that 1 of every 4 students had considered suicide. Suicidal ideation is rather common among our students. And 53% of respondents to a 2018 U-Report poll showed that they had considered suicide. And U-Report is a polling service or a platform that UNICEF has, and we work a lot with the different stakeholders, including the Ministry of Health. And we've done quite a number of polls on mental health. And if you are interested, you can just Google U-Report Jamaica and you'll be able to see all the polls and the poll results that we have done. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously has contributed to anxiety being experienced among young people, the situation where there was no school for many, threat of infection and physical illness, as well as dealing with the mental and social impact of the pandemic, has not left our children unscathed. And this is just a visual of that data that we just discussed. And reason for attempts, importantly, you will see nearly 50% of those who were interviewed said that it was interpersonal conflict. Managing relationships is an issue in our society. And that is relationship with everybody, social relationships, family relationships, and so on, and intimate partner relationships. Going back to the State of the World's Children report, 17 countries conducted focus group discussions among adolescents. And in Jamaica, 9 focus group discussions were done by Dr. Abigail Harrison at the UA. And they were done online, and adolescents were drawn from school and community groups. There was a pretty fairly equal mix of urban, rural, and children from mixed income backgrounds. And I just want to highlight a few of the issues that came out of those focus group discussions done here in Jamaica. What are the main worries and concerns of our young people, the future? And this was strong among boys. There is so much stress on our young men, and that is definitely something that we need to be looking at more and programming more in terms of supporting boys and men. There are worries about employment, supporting a family. And for girls, the girls were very worried about their safety and about sexual violence. And this is not surprising. This is a major issue and cause for trauma among girls in Jamaica. Self-esteem, body image issues, education, and their relationships, those interpersonal issues, relationships with their peers and their family. Emotional challenges, a lot of them reported feeling depressed, feeling suicidal, feeling like self-harm, feeling sad, upset, anxious, volatile, irritable, angry. Behavioral challenges that include rebelling, acting out, self-injury, and substance abuse, and the list goes on. Just a few quotations. Depression. One young person said, I think that this is something that comes with age, that you go through a low level of depression. And basically she's saying, if you don't have somewhere to go with those feelings, that's when it becomes serious, when your emotions and feelings are neglected. Some of the risk factors, family comes up a lot, criticism, lack of support, family conflict, lack of mental health awareness, lack of trust and communication issues, having untrustworthy friends, peer pressure, unsupportive and critical teachers, mistreatment by teachers, academic pressure, and unfair academic experiences came up a lot. Internet-related issues, cyberbullying, and unrealistic expectations, often in relation to their body image. And community level, the violence comes up a lot, and restrictive gender norms, which is very interesting what our boys felt about being able to address their mental health in Jamaica. Across many countries, boys and girls described strong cultural notions of what it means to be masculine. Boys must be tough and strong and unemotional and invulnerable. And that also came out in the focus group discussions here. Our boys say they have nowhere to go, no one to speak to. And because they can't be soft, they can't talk about their mental health because they will be viewed as soft. Girls worry a lot about coming home alive. And most times, one of the girls said, most times I don't even leave my road because you have perverts in my community, and sometimes I feel very uncomfortable. One girl admitted or spoke about her experience. She said, I was raped. I'm currently a teen mother, and all of these things have brought me to suicide and self-harm. I'm a walking time bomb. I can go off at any minute. The impact of the pandemic, as we have discussed, is real. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically impacted the lives of adolescents across the globe. When schools closed, adolescents who were increasingly reliant in that time of life on relationships with their peers as they mature, they were cut off from those networks for 2 years. During the focus groups, participants described the significant impact on their mental health. Said there was the big areas, the big four: fear of infection, social isolation, increased risk behaviors, and challenges with remote education, frustration at not being able to learn well over the digital space. Some protective factors. This is a lot for us to chew on and build on. The young people said family support, strong family relationships, and good parent-child communication. Peers, having peers who understood and were able to give encouragement, having close friends, problem solving, and mental health awareness among friends, supportive teachers, and at the community level, mental health services and strong communities. Internet, they said, was a double-edged sword. It can harm, but it can help because it can help with connecting with people who go through what you go through and help with facilitating self-expression. Schools are a critical space for our young people. Participants suggested that the school is a safe space from toxic home and community environments. They reflected that the structured time in school helped them to avoid the risky situations, including sexual risk and substance abuse. School help kind of helps most of us children because sometimes we get away from a toxic household and can actually be with friends that make us happy. Many young people recounted how their relationships with friends have become strained due to the impact of COVID. And another common theme was the way in which social isolation, as they described it, was self-reinforcing over time. They said the more you want to be alone, the more you're alone, the more you want to be alone, and it becomes harder to socialize. How did they cope? Some helpful ways: seeking support from family and friends, seeking professional help, self-expression, listening to music, playing games, and harmful ways: keeping things to yourself, self-harm, and taking out the anger on others. And of course, looming right behind any kind of mental stress is the possibility of substance use and abuse. Importantly, young people spoke about having family members who don't understand what they're going through, family members who dismiss you when you talk about feeling sad or any kind of emotional distress, and also their help-seeking behaviors. Some barriers, they said they don't easily trust people, fear that people won't take me seriously, fear that others will judge and not understand. Cultural norms around masculinity: a boy, a man cannot ask for this kind of help, that is showing weakness, and feeling ashamed, the stigma and discrimination that permeates our society around mental health issues across age groups. Facilitating factors, peer engagement. So friends still help friends, and that is still important to sort of promote within our groups, our student groups and our young people groups. Trusting relationships with your friends, availability and awareness of community resources, trusting family members, and your own internal motivation, which a number of them said come from already being pretty strong. But a lot of people don't feel like they had the skills for this kind of self-motivation. Importantly, many adolescents describe greater comfort with seeking support from their friends compared to family members. I can't go to my parents with certain things, even though our peers are young and inexperienced. They're the ones we talk to because they may understand and share the same feelings and thoughts as we. So just some really key takeaways for us as we make our environments more friendly for our students who may be in any kind of mental distress, which just about everyone goes through. The focus group discussions underscore that mental health is a significant concern, not just in Jamaica, but across the globe. While the emotional and behavior challenges experienced by adolescents and young people don't always rise to the level of something diagnosable, they nonetheless warrant serious attention. In the discussions, participants underscored that mental health is a taboo or an embarrassing topic for them. And the associated stigma means that adolescents stay silent, they keep it to themselves. They also said that sometimes they feel they lack the language to discuss mental health issues. And very often we have heard this as well in the field, that you have to ask you can't ask young people about feeling depressed. They have a particular idea, and that's fine, about what depression looks like, but talk to them about sadness, talk to them about how often they feel sad and frustrated and so on, and they're better able to relate to it. Despite the challenges, adolescents feel like they can, when they can share, it makes a massive difference. Unfortunately, much needed support, they said, is far too often not forthcoming, and they feel misunderstood, invalidated, and ridiculed very often by friends, family members, teachers, and thus deal with the mental distress on their own. Participants repeatedly express their desire for sympathetic peers or adults with whom they can share their concerns. And when those concerns are severe, they indicated that they wished that mental health and psychosocial support services were more available and less stigmatized. Finally, what can we do? Listen, we have to come from a place of no judgment to facilitate more open discussions among our young people about their mental health and well-being. We have to support parents and caregivers, no doubt about it. We have to support them on how to better parent an adolescent, a growing young person who is more autonomous, less kind of under their guidance, evolving in their capacity to make decisions for themselves. And so it needs a different set of skills as a parent in order to facilitate discussion and safety. Positive school environment, critical in the lives and development of our adolescents, because often it is in the school where they get the support that they're unable to get in the community and in their homes. Services have to be friendly, more accessible. We have to remove unnecessary barriers to access for our young people. And this two-edged sword, as the young people call it, of the digital space, tremendous potential is here. How do we work with it? How do we better understand it for engagement and even limited service delivery? Quick reminder before I close, adolescents and young people, I will add in here, are not all the same. Some are particularly vulnerable because of their life experiences, because of their personalities, because of the issues that they are dealing with health-wise. Individual development is influenced in multiple spheres of life, and we have to look at our structures in the society or service delivery mechanisms, and how friendly we are and accessible we are, and how facilitating our environments are for young people. This is a time, as we have already said, of evolving capacities and many, many wonderful opportunities. And how do we harness those along with, not for, along with our young people? And the ability to make decisions has to be balanced with their protection needs and access to supportive and sensitive information and services. They are an increasing proportion of the world's population. We have a large, also Jamaica has a very large population of adolescents who are transitioning into adulthood, who bring so much promise for Jamaica's development. How do we facilitate that? Gains in child mortality. We keep children alive really well in Jamaica, but we are losing many of our young people to all kinds of disease burdens, including mental health, by the time they get to their teenage years. And in the importance of a life course perspective in health, as much of the adult disease burden requires intervention in the adolescent years. And with that, I thank you for your attention and available for any questions. Thank you.
Wow, that was an amazing presentation from Ms. Novia Condell. A very informative and enlightening presentation addressing mental health challenges in Jamaica. Let us all try to deepen the value and the commitment we give to mental health. So we are coming on nicely. And here we want to share with you a message from UNICEF on the You Matter chat line. And right after that, we will hear from UTech Jamaica students and staff about how they safeguard their mental health.
Did you know that 53% of young people have considered taking their lives?
As a young person, I understand how hard it is with your mental health struggles, but help is here.
To give young people a safe space to talk about their challenges and concerns right there on their phones.
You Matter connects you to trained counselors who can give you support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, free of charge. The chat line is completely anonymous, and whatever you say will be held confidential.
Text support to 876-838-4897 using SMS, WhatsApp, or Facebook Messenger and start the conversation today. Your feelings matter, you matter.
Hi, everyone. We're here at the University of Technology's campus to ask the question, how do you safeguard your mental health?
At times, I try to curate my space via social media. So platforms such as Instagram and Twitter, I try not to use as much.
You know, the Bible states that we should guard our hearts because out of it comes the issues of life. So by having boundaries, that is how I safeguard my mental health.
Well, I mostly draw to keep myself occupied, but also the main important thing I do is talk to my friends and family about issues that is bothering me for a long time, and then they will like give me advice or just comfort me.
Personally, I safeguard my mental health by having good friends around me, talk to, reason with, and talk about stuff that is affecting me.
Personally, I think a solution to that is to find some form of expressive medium, like say art or poetry.
My philosophy is whatever is out of my control, I let it be. So I try not to stress over it. I simply just take things one day at a time, and it has worked for me so far.
So I safeguard my mental health by drinking water and minding my business, and sometimes just try to reconcile your own emotions and get it together.
Thank you very much.
So
Friends, we have reached a high point of this event. We were building towards it and we are almost there. It's now time for our panelists to take the virtual floor and voice their opinions. At this time, I'll invite Mrs. Javila Ho, President of the Jamaican Psychological Society, who will be our moderator for this segment, to stand by. Before Mrs. Ho takes the floor, let me tell you a bit about her. Mrs. Ho is a licensed associate clinical psychologist in Kingston and a senior associate at Cad Morgan and Associates. In her practice, Mrs. Ho focuses on, among other things, adolescent and adult mental health, trauma, and stress-related disorders. She is also the current president of the Jamaican Psychological Society. She has a passion for mental health policy and initiatives focused on developing accessible, affordable, and high-quality mental health care. Mrs. Ho holds a Master's of Science degree in clinical psychology from the University of the West Indies, Mona. Mrs. Ho, over to you.
Thank you so much, Damoy, and thank you, everyone. I want to say a special thank you to Dean Barrett for allowing the faculty to host this webinar on this important day, and also to Ms. Condell for a very excellent and comprehensive presentation on the state of mental health, in particular with our youth. Happy World Mental Health Day, everybody. I'm really pleased that we are able to celebrate and have a conversation today, because as we know, physical health gets a lot of attention, and sometimes we only wait until this day, but it's fine, we're gonna capitalize on it. And so I just want to remind you of today's theme. So it is make mental health and well-being for all a global priority. And those of us who've worked in mental health or work in allied fields know that mental health is important. We've already acknowledged that. But I think the COVID-19 pandemic really was what helped to push mental health to the forefront of our attention, not just as healthcare practitioners, but just general public persons who are working with other people. And so there's no time like the present for us to drive this conversation and then move into better action. So over this next hour, we're gonna have a panel discussion, and the main purpose of this discussion is to pull out that word all out of the theme, because that word all is an all-encompassing, inclusive term. Yet every time we have these conversations about mental health, there are some groups that get lost in the midst or are underrepresented. And so we want to look at our very diverse set of panelists today who will help shed some light on these matters, on these populations, and just what their mental health concerns and experiences have been in our local context. And to really highlight this, the more inclusive nature of this mental health for all being a priority. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our panelists. And you may notice on the program, you might have seen Professor Eldemaya Shero. Unfortunately, Prof. Shero will not be joining us today. However, we do have joining us Dr. Julian Mccoy Davis. And Dr. Davis is a passionate advocate representing the issues of older adults. She has a Doctor of Philosophy in Social Policy from the University of the West Indies, Mona. She's a social gerontologist and the team lead for community outreach at the Mona Aging and Wellness Center at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Her research interests focus on the social and economic issues affecting older adults, and she's a board member of the National Council for Senior Citizens. She's a Christian, she's married, and she's a mother. Welcome, Dr. Mccoy Davis.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also joining us is Dr. Johan White. And Dr. White is a medical epidemiologist in the National Surveillance Unit within the Ministry of Health and Wellness, where his portfolio responsibilities include HIV, TB, and STIs. He has served as a consultant immunologist at the University Hospital of the West Indies and has lectured in the Department of Medicine and Department of Microbiology at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Dr. White received his undergraduate medical training at UWI Mona and subsequently completed his Doctor of Philosophy degree at Kagoshima University, Japan. He is the current president of the Jamaica Occupational Health and Safety Professionals Association. Dr. White, welcome. And then also joining us, we have Dr. Earl Wright. Dr. Wright is currently a consultant psychiatrist for the Medical Services Branch of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. He is also the immediate past president of the Jamaica Psychiatric Association, chairman of the Mental Health Technical Advisory Group for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, and the chairman of the Mental Health Subcommittee, Non-Communicable Disease Task Force. Dr. Wright is the past Director of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in the Ministry of Health. And as director, he guided the process of integration of mental health with the general healthcare services in the government health system and championed the promotion of mental health. He's also a medical graduate of the University of the West Indies and later completed his postgraduate medical education at Harlem Hospital, Columbia University in New York, where he did his psychiatry residency. He also holds a master's in public health, specializing in community mental health from Columbia University. Welcome, Dr. Wright.
Thank you very much.
And then joining us also is Mr. Milton Walker. Milton Walker is the current head of the Press Association of Jamaica, PAJ, and was recently named Deputy General Manager for Broadcast and Cable News, Sports, and Current Affairs for the RJR Gleaner Group. He has a wealth of experience in media and broadcasting, but at the RJR Gleaner Group, Milton has been responsible for driving the expansion of the news center's products, regularly producing groundbreaking documentaries and news specials, including town halls. He was integral in expanding the primetime news and midday news to create greater opportunities to deliver more news content to our audiences. Mr. Walker was also selected as a One World Broadcasting Trust Fellow in 2003 in the United Kingdom. And he's also a CNN Fellow, having participated in the Newsroom Leadership Fellowship in May 2019 at the network's Atlanta headquarters. Mr. Walker, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And then finally, we have Ms. Rihanna Robinson. Rihanna Robinson is a first-year law student at the University of the West Indies, Mona. She's a student leader and youth advocate who serves as a current member of UNICEF's You Report Jamaica Youth Council with responsibility for You Matter, a mental health chatline which was launched in March 2022. Rihanna served as youth facilitator in the Reimagine Education Initiative between UNICEF and the NSFC and provided a youth contribution to the official report of the Education Transformation Commission of Jamaica. Ms. Robinson, welcome. Welcome to all our panelists. Now we see we have a lot of experts on the panel, and just to give an orientation, I'm just gonna go around to each panelist to get some more information, a bit more about your area of work and also the look of mental health within that space. And I'll ask you some specific questions, and then we'll have some more general discussion. I also want to remind those who are viewing online to please put your questions, if you're on Zoom, in the chat. And of course, if you're on YouTube streaming, you can also put it in the comments there. They will definitely send those to me and we can field those to our panelists. So Ms. Robinson, I'm gonna start with you. And I can't see everybody, but I'm assuming I'm seeing some faces already. So I'm assuming everyone's camera is on and they're able to unmute themselves. Ms. Robinson, just yesterday, we saw in some media headlines, mental health chatline surpasses 1,000 sessions with youth in their first 6 months. For many persons who maybe just saw some snippets about You Matter, could you just bring us up to speed on what exactly the You Matter chatline is? Who is it for? How is it done?
All right, awesome. And yes, we have reached our 1,000 sessions and we're very excited about that. So the You Matter chatline is for youth, right? It's a chatline, it's a messaging-based chatline that was done as a partnership with UNICEF and the Ministry of Health, as well as the Caribbean Child Development Center. This chatline gears towards counseling. So we don't diagnose, we don't tell anyone that they suffer from any specific thing. So we're not doing any diagnosis, but we are counseling and guiding persons through what it is that they're going through and referring them if they need to be, right? This chatline is geared towards youth who would start at the age of 16 and older can access this chatline. You access the chatline by messaging the word support to 876-838-4897 on WhatsApp or SMS. And the SMS is completely free when using Flow, and it's free. The chatline overall is free to access, free for the service. Or you message support to You Report Jamaica on Facebook or Instagram. So this chatline was really birthed through the need of mental health support services that would have been expressed by our youth This was a response to a poll done in 2018 by U Report that really showed that young people needed more support with their mental health, and that young people didn't feel as though mental health services were there to support them, and they didn't feel as though mental health was taken seriously in Jamaica. So this was our response to that poll, and we've been doing well so far, and we're broadening our reach now that we've reached 1,000 cases for more youth to be able to benefit from this platform.
So Ms. Robinson, I heard you mention that age range. I know you said 16 and older, but I'm assuming that older also has a cap. What's the end point for that age range?
Well, to be correct, I believe that we use the WHO ages that Novia would have mentioned earlier, but
So
I
that
do
would be
believe
24,
that,
right?
yeah, if it is that you are older than 24, there are other services that you can utilize. I'm not sure if UMatter goes all the way to the CARICOM age, but I know that at UNICEF, we do stick with WHO age ranges.
Okay. And if you could just share with us just quickly, maybe some of the, Ms. Condell mentioned adolescence is a period of, it's a very stressful time. What are some of the general concerns that people have been texting the UMatter chat line with?
All right, so in general, I can't speak to exactly what's happening with the UMatter chat line in terms of what persons are messaging to the chat line, because that's completely anonymous and confidential. But in general, as a young person and interacting with other young persons, and as a youth advocate hearing from the youth that I represent, general concerns, number one is lack of access to services. And that really is a big issue that we're faced with. And secondly to that would be the stigma. I mean, unfortunately, even though mental health conversations have been more frequent and more normalized since recently, especially after the pandemic, unfortunately, there is still stigma surrounding stigma surrounding mental health in Jamaica. And our young people definitely they're at a disadvantage with regards to that aspect of it. Cultural norms, as Novia would have mentioned, is a very, very important thing when it comes on to mental health. Our youth don't necessarily have that level of support in their homes or communities. Socialization plays a large role in that. The violence that we have to be surrounded with. I mean, all of these things have a part to play with how it is that youth interact and what it is that they're going through with their mental health.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Robinson, and I will be getting back to you, so don't worry. I want to now move to Dr. Wright. And Dr. Wright, research has told us that even just globally, that emergency response personnel, which would include, members of law enforcement, are actually at a higher risk of mental health problems than the general population. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you do with the JCF and why would they be at risk, a higher risk for mental health problems than everybody else?
Well, one of the things we know is that most mental health problems, if you have a high level of stress, then you are more susceptible to mental disorders. But I don't want to talk about mental disorders this morning. I want to go to the root problem, right? Because Ms. Condell spoke a lot about the brain and what we need to focus on. Mental health equals brain health. So if your brain is not healthy, you're not going to have a healthy mental health. And by definition, I wonder if I could share my screen a moment. I'll be very brief. Can you?
Or administrators, do you have?
Share my screen? One moment, very brief. Anyway, if we define mental health, we need to talk about when we say mental health, what we're really talking about. And mental health enables a person to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, and learn and work well and contribute to the community. So if you are not able to deal with if you have a violent society like we have in Jamaica, we're talking about a mentally unhealthy population, not talking about a population that we're talking about mental disorders. And in order to deal with that problem, what needs to happen is that we need to focus on the early years. Ms. Condell focused on the adolescent here. I tend to focus on the earlier year. If you give me a child till 7 years, it tells I will show you a man. And every house, if you have a sturdy foundation, you can build. If it's not well done, then you're going to have a problem. So we're really talking about that in the years age 0 to 5, and we can stretch it to age 6. Those are the years that we need to focus on so we can manage the stresses of life and able to deal with the society more effectively. We will decrease the level of violence, we will improve productivity, and we will deal with one another and decrease. One of the problems in Jamaica is the high incidence of adverse childhood events. And if you have adverse childhood events, you're going to have major problems with mental health later on in life. You can't get away from that. So what we're really talking about is develop a healthy brain from 0 to 6, because if you don't do it at that time, if you don't focus on developing a healthy brain at that time, later on you'll be susceptible to all the stresses of life and develop the mental disorders. And I see in the brochure that mental depression is 3%. That's not so. 1 in 5 individuals in Jamaica will have depression. We're talking about 18% and 14%, and women are more susceptible to depression. So you're talking about passing on the problem to another generation. So I would like to focus on mental health, and everyone, we need to have a mentally literate society, that everyone know what mental health is about and how to protect their mental health. And just as you protect your physical health, you should be protecting your mental health and know how to do it. Thank you very much. I won't go on anymore.
All right, thank you, Dr. Wright. We're going to come back to you, no worries. I want to shift now to Mr. Walker. And Mr. Walker, I realize your camera is off, so I'm not seeing you, but I know that you are there. Mr. Walker,
I am.
Similar to the JCF and some of these other populations, we know that, again, journalists, reporters, persons who are investigating, various stories of what's happening in our own island, they have to face and discuss and delve into some of these more difficult topics, even some of those topics that Dr. Wright just mentioned, the violence, some of these experiences that others are going through. What are your thoughts on the toll that working in the media, because we want to bring attention to the media workers, right? We're flipping it a little bit. What are your thoughts on the toll that working in the media can have or has had on the mental health and well-being of members of the media fraternity?
Yeah, first of all, and thanks very much for having me and for having our perspective on this matter. Journalists and certain kinds of journalists, particularly photographers and cameramen, are directly exposed to violence. They see it literally every time they go on the road to cover a crime story, and some reporters as well. We acknowledge that there are high levels of crime in the Jamaican society, and we have to cover crime. Various media houses have different policies or different ways to cover crime. One of the things we try to do in the media is not to, sensationalize it, not to give it undue prominence. Believe it or not, many nights in our newscast, we have no crime stories, but I tell that to people and they don't believe me. But there are many nights that we don't have a single crime story. And we try and focus on, some of the human side of the actual crime story. It's difficult because crime is brutal, it's harsh, and it generally severely disrupts lives. And lately we're seeing some real vicious, heinous crimes, beheadings and stuff like that. And, killing children, women, old people, which didn't exist 20, 25 years ago. And then you have things like social media, which literally magnifies the problem, because we have guidelines, we have policy in-house in each media house, how to cover and how we treat crime stories.
Right.
But social media, they have no filter. And so it's out there. And one of the policies that we have, for example, at my media house for the RJR Gleaner group is, don't film it if we can't air it. And it's a simple policy. If we cannot put it on TV or put it on our social media. And by the way, the rules that we have for our on-air output is the same we use for social media.
Social media, okay.
Yeah. So we believe that if we cannot put it on air, it doesn't make sense to film it. We don't need to see it. We don't need to see the bodies. We don't need to see the charred remains at all, because we're not going to air it, and it really doesn't help. We also, I know media houses have different arrangements, but I know journalists have had to get counseling because they are affected by the high levels of crime, or they may have been covering a particular story or a couple of crime. And so we have to take care of that aspect of our team members, because we can't have team members who are not operating at optimal level 1, or who are troubled because of what they're doing as their work.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
And so there are various things that can be done and are done, that nobody is going to be permanently put to cover crime. You know, people must take breaks, and particularly cameramen, because you know, some of them have become very almost immune to violence, and we have to be mindful of that. We also have journalists in the profession who have been victims of crime themselves, and so you have that added aspect, or their family members, their friends have been victims of crime. And so again, that also adds to the trauma and the mental health challenges that they face as well. So there are a lot of issues that are impacting us directly as a profession that we have to deal with on a day-to-day, weekly basis.
Mr. Walker, sorry, you mentioned that sometimes, you know, persons have to seek counseling. Does that mean that mental health, and you feel that mental health and mental health awareness is a lot more spoken about within the fraternity? Or do you feel as though there is still a bit of stigma or taboo?
I think there is still some stigma and taboo, but certainly for the RJR Gleaner group, I do know that we take it very seriously. We work with HR or HR department, and we have a team of counselors who are on standby, that we I make you know, quiet arrangements with team members, and of course their follow-up.
So there is some accessibility to mental health services provided.
Yes. And our team members are aware of that. I can't really speak to the individual media houses, but I do know that some more established ones will have similar issues. When I, for example, was at CVM, we had, I remember a reporter coming to me once and saying, you know, oh, Milton, I can't, just take me off crime for a while. I just can't manage it. And, you know, so you make those adjustments from time to time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walker, for sharing that perspective. I know we don't often think about, and that's part of, you know, pulling up that word all. You don't often think about. Oh, I think someone's mic is unmuted. All right, yeah, no, we don't often think about some of these populations, and even just the things that persons working in the media, again, working in the constabulary force, have to face on a daily basis. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Dr. Mccoy Davis, I'm coming straight to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I read very recently that due to just globally this aging, you know, our population aging, that the number of senior citizens with mental health conditions is expected to double by 2030. That's a slightly worrying a number, but also people 85 and older also have some of the highest suicide rates in every population. So I want to I want you to share with us now, well, maybe firstly what a social gerontologist does, because I think maybe that term might not be very familiar to many persons, but then also what are some of the unique factors that have been impacting the mental health of our local population, our local senior citizens?
Okay, so thank you so very much for having me to the School of Education. Just want to say thanks as well as to you. So I'm a social gerontologist, and what I do, I work with older persons. I am not a medically trained doctor, so my background is in social sciences. And so I'm able to look at the different social issues that affect older persons. So that's who a social gerontologist is. And I work across a wide array of areas relating to social issues. So in terms of older persons and their mental health, we, as you mentioned earlier, we are living in an aging population, and by an aging population, when 10% of your population is over the age of 60, which is a United Nations definition that we have adopted in Jamaica, then we consider your population to be aging. And so globally, we're seeing a high, in terms of population aging, we're seeing that it's relatively high among most countries, even within our region. And so Jamaica, for example, has approximately 13% of its population that's over the age of 60. In the next couple of years, we're going to become a super age nation. For example, by the year 2030, so we're working towards Vision 2030, but by the time we get there, we anticipate that at least 20% of our population will be over the age of 60. So put that into context in terms of your question about mental health issues and older persons. Very common, often we think that as persons grow older, that they automatically have mental health issues. We often associate that, with saying older persons, when they reach a certain age, they start acting cuckoo or they're senile. And that's not a fact, because mental health issues are not a normal part of aging. It is a health condition. And so it means that not every older persons will be affected by mental health issues as they grow older. But yeah, we do understand the issue with regards to the older adults, which is persons who are 85 years and over, and their trajectory in terms of health condition, and as such, their risk factor, the different risk factors that they have to be able to be more susceptible to mental health issues. Unfortunately, I can't speak to the suicide data. I'm not as familiar with that. I don't really think that we have that much of a common issue in Jamaica, but it's definitely something that I can look into.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, I guess, these are more global statistics rather than country specific, right? With the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that a lot of persons over the age of 65 in particular were, I want to use the word subject to some, strict measures. And this, of course, was for the benefit of health, but there was increased isolation that we were hearing about with, again, over the 65 and older. Could you speak to maybe some of the impact that you saw when, with some of the persons that you work with during the COVID-19 pandemic? Anything that was particularly exacerbated or just new issues that were presenting with our elderly and older persons?
So in terms of the stay-at-home orders, clearly older persons were the ones who were most affected by that, because the regulations did have an age limit. And so it would have covered at first age 65, and then it went down to 60. And so that, for example, meant that persons were not allowed to engage as much as they used to. So persons would be staying at home. A part of the messaging at the time was to encourage family members to reduce their interaction with their older family members. And so some family members took it further, not just social interaction, not just physical interaction, but they went as far as social interaction, as in they're not calling to check in on the older adult, they're not communicating and things like that. So someone mentioned earlier about isolation and its impact on depression, and that is natural.
Yes.
So older persons who are not engaged, they're by themselves, they're not meeting up with their colleagues as they used to, they're not able to engage, for example, in faith-based activity, then it does impact on their social well-being as a person. the comment was made earlier that if you're doing something and you get comfortable with it, then after a while, you're not as enthused, for example, to go back out. So re-engagement, for example, was something that for some older persons would naturally become an issue. Many are still reluctant to re-engage, although we have removed our measures. And so that ultimately leads to a problem. We also found, for example, that not just mental health issues, but persons with chronic conditions who were strictly following the guidelines and not proceeding, for example, to get their health checks done, it means that those health conditions, for example, could contribute to mental health issues because they're not getting the required health checks, then it can affect them mentally. So those are some.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mccoy Davis. And just to note, for the public, we're not focusing only on mental ill health, but to just highlight some of the issues. I want to just highlight some of the issues that may be affecting persons so that when we, go back to, a fulsome discussion now just about some of the protective factors, okay? So I'm gonna move to Dr. White, Dr. Johan White. And Dr. White, very interestingly, I received an email this morning from the Lancet Psychiatry, and they had a article with, speaking about mental health integration in HIV and TB programs and how this would really be a landmark change for work in those populations. And I just want to read a tiny snippet from it, and then I'm going to ask you some more questions to share. But it says, people with poor mental health frequently have higher HIV and TB infection rates than people without, but also those with HIV and TB infection are at more risk for mental ill health, which may impact, of course, treatment adherence and greater mortality. This association has been established for depression, specifically with both HIV and TB. Given this relationship with TB, HIV, and mental ill health, any governmental strategy to eliminate HIV or TB must also address the mental health and psychosocial needs of those who may be infected or at risk of infection. And I just pulled that part out of the article because I thought, well, how timely, because we are able to have a conversation with you. But also here we again see the pairing of not just mental health or pathology, but mental health, and that could be the well-being side of it as well, and physical health and well-being, right? So this topic always sort of spans the two. Dr. White, I want you to share with us from your experience, what, again, in the Jamaican context, what has been some of the mental health impact of just, a diagnosis of HIV, TB, or STIs, as your bio mentions, but also the stigma associated with some of those diagnoses.
All right, excellent. Thank you for the invitation. Let me say that the views that are expressed are my own and not necessarily those of any of the organizations that I'm affiliated with. But you mentioned a very critical word, which is that of stigma. And there's this phenomenon in social sciences as well as medicine that we refer to as minority stress. And minority stress is really any unique or increased demands on one's coping resources because of a particular characteristic that you have. And that may be an infection. It may be your sexual identity, perhaps somebody who identifies as lesbian or gay or bisexual, or HIV status, or in some populations. So for example, in Jamaica, those may be some of the identities that may be stigmatized, but in another setting, such as North America, it may be your ethnic identity, maybe the color of your skin. So any situation in which you're placed and you're the minority, and minority doesn't necessarily mean numbers, it means a social displacement or social disadvantaged status because of something, some negative meaning that is attached to a particular part of your identity. So stigma is one of the things that pins a risk of having a negative health outcome to you, because people not only stigmatize, they stigmatize and use that label to diminish you in relation to the rest of society, or usually the majority. So you can imagine then for somebody living with HIV who may be stigmatized because of the infection, maybe because people associate certain risk factors in their minds. Perhaps there's negative stigmatization attached to sexual behavior. They may make assumptions about the number of sexual partners that those individuals may have, which is not, these are myths or assumptions about aspects of people's identity. So usually also they may be exaggerated. So they make assumptions about number of sexual partners or the types of sexual behavior you may be involved in. And so there's isolation, there's ostracizing of those groups. And it increases your risk of for mental health outcomes. So that includes depression, that includes suicidal ideation, that includes suicidal attempts, that includes post-traumatic stress, that includes anxiety, that includes substance use, so use of marijuana or cannabis or smoking, right? So those risk factors are there. But interestingly, one of the things that I want to point out, even as I say this, is that they're not victims, right? One of the things that we ought to consider, take for example, one of the studies that we did a few years ago, looking at mental health needs of sexual minorities, for example, where we know that there's an increased risk for mental health problems because of the negative social environment. And what we found is that maybe about 1 in 10 individuals met criteria for major depression in the past month, so the preceding month. It's high. It's higher than the average that you would have mentioned for the Jamaican population. But it meant that about 90% did not meet criteria for major depression. So what are the resiliency factors and the protective factors for those individuals that may be worthwhile looking into so that we can learn from those behaviors and coping mechanisms to train or teach or help others with their coping strategies. So in general, any stigmatized identity, whether it's HIV status, tuberculosis diagnosis, even aging, the elderly, sexual minority populations, ethnic minority populations, racial minorities, religious minorities are at increased risk for being stigmatized and experiencing discrimination and stressors from their environment, from their social environment, which may contribute or increase this risk for these negative outcomes, and not just mental health outcomes, but physical health outcomes, as you mentioned.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. I have a question here from one of our viewers for Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker, I hope you're with us. Let me just see. So this person wanted to find out, how prepared are our journalists to address trauma when they are on the scene of some traumatic event? Example, children, adults who present as severely traumatized. How are journalists prepared to deal with that?
I don't know if journalists are prepared per se. I think more experienced journalists may have ways of dealing with that. I know I have personally, when I used to be on the road more and cover crime, that I found myself literally consoling victims. There was a case which it remains with me to this day, when a CCN officer was shot on Mountain View during a flare-up in that area. This was in the early 2000s, and Corporal Roland Lane was traveling with Inspector Victor Edwards in a car, and he was shot on Mountain View, and he died literally on the way to KPH. And I was at Mountain View at the time, and I heard about it, and I went down to KPH, and then we learned on the way that he had died. And I was, a group of us were outside the Madden's funeral home on North Street beside the KPH, and Tanya, his wife, who I later got to know very well, and she actually eventually joined the police force. I don't know if she's still in the police force. Okay. And she came on the scene, and I think I may have known Tanya before that, because the journalists were very close to the people at CC, and this was in James Forbes' time. And and she came on the scene, and she literally just fell in my arms. My journalism ended there for a moment, because I had to put on a different hat. And because this was somebody who was deep in grief. You've just lost your husband in such a horrible way. And she needed to be comforted, to be consoled. And so, you know, for the next 10, 15 minutes, until I think the police force counseling services chipped in, I was her shoulder. I was to deal with. And, you know, I followed up in subsequently to the particular incident with her, to see how she was doing. So some of that will come with experience, but I don't think journalists are trained per se to handle victims. You may, and cameramen too, comfort people on a particular crime.
So you don't know of any formal sort of setup to prepare persons before they go out, which I think is what that person, I think it's from someone at Parenting Partners Caribbean. Thank you.
Right, no. And I want to also just address something. When I speak of crime and violence, I may have made reference to homicide, but I'm talking about crime in general. Yeah, crime in general. When I speak of crime and violence. Yeah, that's the first thing. Because there are different types of crime that are impacting people. We've had a lot of cases where persons have been abducted. They may not have been murdered or physically harmed, but that is in itself a very, very traumatic experience. And taken to ATMs and, you know, forced to turn their PIN over and to pull money from their accounts. So we will cover that. We also want to focus more on, and we do, on victims, but quite often at the particular time and even some days or weeks after, they don't want to talk, and so you're also having to deal with that. It's a little easier for our colleagues in print because people generally more willing to talk to a print reporter who has just a script rather than someone with a camera or a reporter. Camera is very kind of intrusive things. I think our print colleagues are able to do a lot more than, say, television news are able to do. And let me also address something. Murder does not sell. I'm sorry, I don't know who ever thought that it never.
You're seeing some of the comments. Okay, I see. I was wondering what we're addressing here.
Murder never sells. Murder is actually drive viewers away. We cover homicides because it's an important event. If 3 or 5 people are killed in a single incident, that's an important story. That's 5 lives lost, 5 human beings who are no longer with us, who are leaving families and communities deep in trauma, and the media have to cover that. So, but it's not our aim. We don't set out every day to look for murders. In fact,
that's not the agenda.
No, we are
Thank you so much, Mr.
We're quite happy when there are no homicides or crime in our newscasts. Believe me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walker. I see Dr. Wright has his hand up. Dr. Wright, please go ahead.
Yes,
I'm not sure if this is in response or just adding.
It's in response to Mr. Walker. One of the things I think is, like in the police force, every journalist should know how to protect their mental health and to manage their stress on an ongoing basis. And that's going to be important as a general information, not only for the journalists and the police force, but for the population in general, because stress is inflammatory. And therefore, if you have increased stress over time, you're going to develop non-communicable diseases and the other illnesses. So the managing your stress level is going to be very important over time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. And that brings me to my question for the general panel. You know, working in the areas that you work with, what are some of the, I guess, gaps that you think, or what are some suggestions to fill some of the gaps in terms of mental health awareness, mental health access for the various populations that you work with, that you think we need to, as a population and as a country, work towards filling to provide better support? Dr. Mccoy Davis, you can go ahead.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest gaps come from our cultural conditioning of mental health issue as an issue that older persons experience.
and that it's a natural and normal process. And so it's very important for us to really be able to deal with that, to come to the realization that it is not. And so information, I find, or misinformation is something that needs to be addressed. So that is one issue. The other issue, I think, is also in terms of families and families being aware of what their loved one is, what it is that they're going through, and how it is that the family is able to cope with what it is that they're going through. Sometimes because of the kind of stigma and discrimination that comes along with the mental illness, some family members may ultimately neglect their loved one, which is not good. Or the kind of embarrassing situations. So the family members don't want to deal with it and they stay away from it. So those are things that are, very important. And I think another gap is that there needs to be more support beyond the family, beyond the individual dealing with the situation. There needs to be more public awareness. So even what we're doing today is something that is good, but it has to be something that is more strategic and sustained. So get the information across, and persons are a part of the process. So yes, younger persons are affected by mental health issues, but as our discussion shows today, all persons, irrespective of age, are affected. So that really is what we're talking about, how it is that we can prioritize mental health issues, getting the intersectoral participation on board and support, then I think we will be on our way to something good. And just to steal something, when Rihanna started talking earlier, she was talking about the U report and the chat and all of that. And I'm thinking, and that is something that especially older persons could benefit from. So I know UNICEF is child friendly, it's children focused. So we really need to get other partners on board, for example, to be able to provide that kind of support and service for older persons and their family members. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCoy Davis. Ms. Robinson, Rihanna, yes, I see your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, you spoke of gaps, and I believe one thing that I even mentioned earlier, and we've been speaking about it, is the stigma. And I think to address that, this was even mentioned earlier as well with regards to starting conversations early. We need to normalize conversations about mental health in our spaces, in our schools or churches, any space that is frequented by any person, right? So we need to ensure that we normalize these conversations. There are so many young people who believe that mental health is something negative, meaning that if you mention mental health, that means that the person is crazy, something is wrong with them, or they have depression or something like that. But mental health is not always negative. There's positive mental health. And with a positive mental health, you can fuel your behaviors, you can live a happy life, you can be intrinsically motivated, right? So if it is that we are able to normalize these conversations and shift the focus from just the negative sides of mental health, but on the maintenance of your mental health, ensuring that you're in a good space, then that can also reduce the stigma and the different issues that we're going through. I mean, there are several factors in life that contribute to us having negative mental health. But if we teach our young people more about maintenance of this mental health and where they can get access to this type of support, then that will also reduce what it is that's happening now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. And I think you really tapped into what Dr. Wright mentioned earlier about addressing mental health and teaching, not just addressing mental health, but teaching, whether it's emotion regulation skills and things like this, greater awareness from a very young age, because these elderly that we are speaking about were once children, right? This is the spectrum. This is the lifespan that we're looking at. And so it is so important to increase and normalize that conversation. I fully agree with you. And I thank you for sharing that with us. Dr. White.
Yes, absolutely. One of the presentation from Ms. Condell was so comprehensive, and it points out the numerous challenges that adolescents have to navigate growing up. Imagine, compounded on that, a stigmatized sexual identity. So an adolescent, an LGBT youth, a youth with mental challenges or a youth with HIV compounding on top of what you have to go through as an adolescent, the usual stuff, and then that, it really, really is challenging. One of the things that we observed from our research a few years ago was that family support is so critical. It was the participants who had reported being rejected by their families who were 8 times more likely to have major depression or anxiety. So family support is critical. And sometimes families don't know how to react. They're afraid of the courtesy stigma that Dr. Davis spoke about earlier, being stigmatized for having mental health problems in your family. But every family has it. My family has had challenges to deal with. Every family in my community has had somebody that they know, either extended family or somebody in the community. So every family, I think, has had some form for some moment or the other to deal with. But we need to be equipped. We need to be educated about mental health issues and resources to access to be able to deal with these. Another important point that I'll make is that organizations, institutions of work and of education have a unique opportunity to set the standards. You can put non-discrimination policies in place in your organization that says, we're not going to tolerate any kind of bullying of your peers or your colleagues based on their sexual identity or gender identity or religious affiliation, etc. We can start there. So even if the law doesn't catch up, in your institution where people spend most of their life at place of work or education, we have a big opportunity there. I also have to remind us that even as the Occupational Safety and Health Bill lags, workplaces have a responsibility to put measures in place to mitigate psychosocial hazards. So if their exposure to trauma, violence, stressors, etc., the workplace has a responsibility to put tools or interventions in place to help their workers. On the individual level, my final point is that when you're stigmatized, there's a risk of internalizing all of this stigma. And this is a suggestion that applies to anybody. Negative thoughts feed on more negative thoughts. The thing with depression is that when you feel depressed, you listen to depressed songs and you do the most depressing things, you self-isolate. So you have to take a deliberate effort.
And very intentional.
Find your peers who are like you. There are lots of social support groups, from sexual minority support groups, HIV support groups for the elderly. Find them out, seek them out, and talk to somebody who is like you for that peer support. Those are my suggestions.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. And I'm just acknowledging Dr. Wright's comments in the chat, just saying that we need to really speak more about good mental health, emotional intelligence, and wellness. And he also referred to the need for the mental health literacy program, which I do believe just last week, the Ministry of Health and Wellness made a comment on the initiation of mental health literacy in schools. And hopefully that will be a program that can be expanded across the grades and age levels. And so just finally, Mr. Walker, in just a few minutes, could you just give us your feedback in terms of what could be done within your fraternity? It's 1 or 2 recommendations.
Well, I think first and foremost, as I think it's Dr. Wright said, that we need to be, as media hosts, the different media hosts need to ensure that journalists have the support systems to deal with their own mental health challenges, and also to deal with just confronting trauma on a daily basis through their work. Because if they don't, then you have a crisis. Even during COVID, I know there were some, when, for example, some media houses had outbreaks, that in itself was a traumatic event which impacted journalists. We had to go out to hospitals and in the society to cover, and that caused some challenges. We actually had created protocols from even before Jamaica had our first case in terms of how we would handle our going out to cover the crisis in the various hospitals.
Right.
So one is the preparation and the empowering journalists at all levels to be able to cope. I think we need also to ensure that the support mechanisms in terms of like counseling services and other devices, measures that can be taken to give journalists breaks and to help them to de-stress, and all the mechanisms that are available and tools that are available to help journalists to cope. You know, for example, me, when I go home, I want to watch stuff that will make me laugh. You know, I don't go on the road much anymore, but I am exposed to it because I have to review stories and
right.
Kind of stuff. So I'm still exposed to it, even though I'm not physically going on the road. And somehow some people just seem to think that it's okay to send me certain kinds of things on WhatsApp. You know, and
which is something I did like in the video that was shown earlier about people speaking about curating their, you know, some of the social media.
Indeed.
I know sometimes we can't stop
I
people.
have a clear policy. Do not send me those things. No, don't send it. If it's not something you think I can put on air, don't send it to me because I'm not.
All right, Mr. White. Mr. Walker. Thank you so much. We do have to wrap our panel discussion. I want to thank all our panelists for joining in the conversation. I know this conversation could go on. There's so much more we could delve into, but I do think this is a start at bringing some more awareness and exposure to some of these population groups that maybe don't necessarily often get discussed. And so hopefully this is something that we can continue and develop and devise some more sustainable ways of addressing and enhancing mental health, good mental health in these populations. I want to thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it over now to Mr. Damoy, who I believe is going to be closing us out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mrs. Ho. Based on the questions and the excellent answers given, I think it's safe to say that we are all quite satisfied with the material covered. So I'd like to extend a big thank you to Mrs. Javila Ho, the moderator, and of course to our panelists, Mr. Milton Walker, President of the Press Association of Jamaica, Dr. Johan White, medical epidemiologist in the National Surveillance Unit, Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ms. Rianne Robinson, UNICEF U-Report Youth Council Representative, Dr. Earl Wright, consultant psychiatrist at the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and Dr. Julian Mccoy Davis, team lead for Community Outreach Mona Aging and Wellness Center, UE Mona. We're almost at the end of today's session, but before that, we have a special item that we would like to share with you. It's the soft launch for the Jamaica Society for the Blind Debate and Empowerment Project. Ms. Roshana Jarrett from the School of Humanities and Social Sciences and the Jamaica Association for Debate and Empowerment, JADE, will do the honors. Following Ms. Jarrett, head of the Social Sciences Division, Dr. Kenisha Nelson, will deliver our vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to share with you this afternoon information regarding a project that we here within the Social Sciences Unit at the University of Technology, Jamaica, will be undertaking in the come next year, 2023. All right, so the Jamaica Association for Debating and Empowerment, in partnership with the Jamaica Society for the Blind, as well as the Social Sciences Unit, will be taking on this project. And the rationale for this project is that members of the blind community are oftentimes feeling neglected and are left in isolation without the kind of emotional support and psychological help that they so need. And what better day to do this than on World Mental Health Day, when we're focusing on minority groups and their mental well-being. So members of this community, we believe that they need a space within which they can speak up, where their voices can be heard, and issues related to the disability can be discussed. And so that is one of the reasons why we are taking on this campaign. What does a campaign look like? Well, we seek to bring awareness to the wider society as to the role and services provided by the Jamaican Society for the Blind. We will also provide leadership, empowerment, and debate training to interest members of the same society or group. We will also provide support to the participants from the visually impaired community through mental health intervention, facilitating their in-house, through our in-house or resident psychologist, Dr. Kenisha Nelson, and other members of the team. And we will also be giving them some debating and public speaking training. But you might ask the question, how is it that these three entities actually, come together to launch a project such as this? And how do we fit into this big puzzle? Well, the Jamaica Society for the Blind they've been in existence for over 65 years, and they have provided support to the blind and visually impaired community during that time period. They provide training, they provide eye care, advocacy, and other social services. The Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, JADE Limited, as we refer to them, they're a pretty young organization with only 8 years under their belt. However, they are guided by the mission of fostering empowerment through debating, critical thinking, and public speaking. And I'm sure you can follow me now when I say that these institutions all come together to make this possible. And here within the Social Sciences Unit at the University of Technology, Jamaica, with a focus in psychology, we believe that our role is really to empower minority groups. And we have this event here today focusing on minority groups, and the blind and visually impaired community is one such group. And so we want to also, reach out to them, provide them with the tools necessary to maintain good mental health and well-being. What will the project look like? So the team, the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, the Jamaica Society for the Blind, and we here in the Social Sciences Unit will be traveling right across the island to carry out training sessions. And you might ask, what will the training sessions entail? I'll speak to that later on. So the teams from different regions, they will also be competing against each other in debate tournaments. The topics that will be discussed will be matters affecting the disabled community, specifically the blind and visually impaired, Disabilities Act, and other challenges that the community faces. Focusing a little bit more on the project, we intend to start the project in January of 2023. The project will run approximately 3 months, and Jamaica will be divided into 5 clusters, and we will meet at different locations depending on the cluster that your parish falls under. So for cluster 1, we will have St. Andrew being the meeting point, cluster 2, Portland being the meeting point, cluster 3, St. Anne, cluster 4, St. James, and cluster 5, Manchester. As it relates to mental health, we're going to be looking at adjusting to blindness, managing anxiety and depression, because we understand that these are some of the issues that face the community. And we want to also help them to develop resilience as it relates to adjusting to that new state that they might find themselves in. As it relates to debating, we're going to be introducing them to debating. We're going to be introducing them to argumentation and what the different styles of debating are. And the Jamaica Society for the Blind will provide the community or advise the community as to the services that are available to them. They will definitely get testimonials from persons who are blind and visually impaired and who have, defied the odds and are functional members of society. And they will also be training them as to how to use the technology to better adjust to blindness. Here today, we want to ask Corporate Jamaica to partner with us because this is a very important initiative. This is a community that a lot of times we pass the Society for the Blind along Old Hope Road and we might not even know that they exist. We see persons walking along the road and they are blind or visually impaired. And yes, we empathize with them. But here we are giving them an opportunity. We're giving them a voice. We're letting them know that they too matter and their mental health is also important to us. So we're asking Corporate Jamaica to partner with us on this initiative. And if there are persons on this Zoom call or on YouTube or wherever it is that you might hear about this project, we're asking you to reach out to us. My email address is here, rjarrett@utech.edu.jm or projects@myjade.org. You can also contact Dr. Nelson at knelson@utech.edu.jm or Mr. Jermaine Barrett at jermaine@myjade.org. And if you have any questions, you can also send those questions and we can provide you with further information as it relates to the project. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I will be able to address them. If not, you can just send us an email and we'll be more than happy to respond to those questions. Back to you, Mr. Moderator.
TradeLab is everything information technology. They do system design, software development, computer security, networking, data recovery, website design. So what more could I want? TradeLabs is everything. Find them at Shop 26 Clock Tower Plaza. Now my advice to Uno, call the number on the screen. Call him. Want to think information technology? Call TradeLabs.
Good afternoon, everyone, and what an afternoon it has been. I'm sure you will join me in agreeing that this has been an engaging event, and I hope you will leave here this afternoon energized about making your mental health a priority. But the event would not have happened without the input of several people who we believe should be duly recognized. On behalf of the planning team, I'd like to first thank the Dean, Professor Sherman Barrett, for her message, which gave context to the event on a topic that aligns with the activities in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences within the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies. A special thank you to our guest speaker, Ms. Novia Condell, for accepting our invitation to speak on the status of adolescent mental health in Jamaica. I echo the sentiments of the host, Mr. Rowe, when he said, your presentation was both engaging and informative. To our panelists, Dr. Earl Wright, Mr. Milton Walker, Dr. Johan White, Ms. Rihanna Robinson, and Dr. Julian Mccoy Davis. We're grateful for your willingness to take the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. Your perspectives on the challenges members of your community face and how these affect their mental health were insightful. To our panel moderator, Ms. Javilia Ho, please accept our sincerest thanks for so ably guiding the discussions today. Your questions and probes allowed the discussions to flow effortlessly and brought some important issues to the fore. We are also indebted to the team at CAP Productions, led by Dr. Rohan Lewis and Mr. Dwayne Rose. Thank you for your patience, guidance, and hard work in producing the event. To the group of interns who worked on various aspects of the production, Tiana Gordon, Michael Endala, Kayan Russell, Demarca Shaw, Jolene Slack, Pasania Taylor, Annalie Bartley, Rihanna Shakespeare, and of course, our wonderful host, Mr. Demore. You did an amazing job, and we're grateful for your hard work. Thank you to the technical team, Mr. Lennox Haldane, Siobhan Hibbert, Joel Smith, and Mr. Wesley Dixon. We appreciate you. To my planning team, Ms. Patrice Reed, Najani Stewart, Ms. Zoe Shim, and the always reliable Ms. Roshana Jarrett, thank you. And finally, thank you to everyone who tuned in today on Zoom and on our YouTube channel. This event was successful because of your presence. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next event next year. I will now turn you back over to our host for his closing remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our World Mental Health Awareness Day 2022. I was certainly happy to be here, weren't you? This session proved to be very informative and insightful. I would like to thank our sponsor once more, Tread Laboratory Limited. We are extremely grateful for your support. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. And remember, make mental health and well-being a global priority for all. Take care.
TradeLab is everything information technology. They do system designs, software development, computer security, networking, data recovery, website design. So what more could I want? TradeLabs is everything. Find them at Shop 26 Clock Tower Plaza. Now my advice to Uno, call the number on the screen. Call him. Want to think information technology? Catch with Labs.
Hi, my name is Romani, and I suffer from social anxiety. So there are different types of anxiety. Andea, she has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That means she's extremely obsessed with being organized, even patterns, and dislikes untidy spaces, which leads her to hating when somebody touches her things. Yola is somewhat different from Dea and I. She suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and kind of has an anger issue. But you'd never know because she controls it so well.
You need help. I think I could meet a lot of new friends today. Look around and see if there's anybody you'd like to talk to.
Oh, money, go.